Okay, can everyone hear me? I think my mic is on. Well, it's great to see so many of you here to celebrate this Mother's Day weekend. So first, I will take a second to introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. It's been almost 10 years ago that my brother Mark and sister-in-law Missy came here to serve at Crestwood. So you've probably seen me at various events here at the church, and even more frequently now on Sundays visiting with my parents, who are here often now that my dad is retired from the ministry. So it was a couple of months back when I was leaving Bible study one evening when I was cornered by sweet Linda Disher, who asked me about being a speaker for today's event. Now, for those of you that know Linda, she is not an easy gal to say no to. So I then joked that instead of calling my wonderful and sensible mom, I made the mistake of calling my dad, who in true preacher-like form was like, "This is the greatest opportunity and such the best idea ever, Beth." And before I knew it, I was saying yes, which brings me here today. So in talking with Missy about this year's theme, Bloom Where You're Planted, I wanted to share a message that would not only resonate with the mothers, but for everybody here today. So if we as women of God are going to bloom where we're planted, it requires 3 bold steps out of our comfort zone. The first is to be present. That sounds really simple, right? Well, let's see. How many of you are so distracted with your busy lives that you've ever done the following? Feel free to raise your hands, let's be honest. Have you ever lost your phone? And you're looking all over your house, your purse, your car, you can't find it, and then you find it and it's in your pocket, or worse yet, you're talking on it. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Who has ever accidentally used the wrong ingredient while cooking? Does it happen? It happened to my dad once in an infamous story in our family where he was making biscuits and gravy one morning, and when he was making the gravy, instead of using flour, he used powdered sugar. Yeah, it was so bad, our dog Pooch wouldn't even eat it. How many of you have ever been driving in a car and you arrive at your destination and you have no memory of how you even got there? It's happened to a lot of us. So we're distracted. We've got full plates, and maybe it's not the season that you're in right now, but I bet that you've been there, or maybe you feel like you're a permanent resident there. So we can recognize that being present is a challenge, but let's look at what the Bible teaches us. We're taught to focus on what God is doing now. In Isaiah 43:18 and 19, it says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland." Now maybe there's a desert or a wasteland in your life right now, or from your past, and God wants you to focus on now, in the present today. We're also taught to live in the moment. In Matthew 6:34, it says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." We're also taught that life is short. In James 4:14, "How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, and then it's gone." Now, I think that this speaks to most of us. For those that are mothers, is there a better example than how quickly your children grow up? It happens so fast. It happens when we're celebrating birthdays, and you turn 30 and you're wondering where your 20s went. For those of us turning almost 40 and you're wondering where your 30s went. So we can understand that time is flying by. And if we're living busy, distracted lives, and that's become the norm for so many of us, then it's going to take bold steps to be more present. So we need to slow down. That's not easy. We live in a fast-paced world, and it takes a real effort to not get caught up in it. But in Psalm 46:10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." We've got to stop rushing around. We've got to press the pause button. We also need to make sure that we are carving out time and space for God and ask Him to quiet our minds and lean on His strength to allow us to focus on the present. Something is always going to have our attention, and we need to be present in the things that matter. So I want to encourage each of you today to consider what step that might look like in your life, because someone is counting on you to be present for the things that count. Now that leads me to the next step. We must not only be present, we must be intentional. Living a life with purpose. Now, how many of you, another question, want to be the worst mom in the world? No hands are going up. Do you want to be the worst daughter, the biggest slob, the worst cook? None of us do. We want to be the best. We all want to raise the best children. We want to be the best daughter, be the best spouse. But if we want to be the best, then what is that going to take to be able to bloom where we're planted? It takes intention. Faithfulness, effective parenting, good relationships, these are things that do not happen accidentally. They happen intentionally. Mark is doing a current series on faith, and a few weeks ago he had talked about Noah building the ark. Now that takes some serious intention. If you recall, this was a time when there was no rain. The area where they're building the ark is thought to be on a mountain, and despite all the ridicule and doubters he had to have faced, he continued to preach to the people and continued to do this for 120 years. Now, I think that many of us could probably say we can't get through a day or even a week being intentional. Noah was living a life with intention. So why is this important? Well, if we're not being intentional with Christ, then how can we know what his will is for us? If we're not communicating with him, then how do we know what he might be saying to us? Prayer is our means of communication. And one of the biggest obstacles to be staying tuned into God is the fact that we're busy. We get up early in the morning and it's off to work into school, or you're getting others off to work into school. You're cooking meals, there's homework, there's kids and pets that need cared for. I mean, by the end of the day, I'm exhausted. And I think that probably many of you are too. The challenge that we face with such busy lives is that it's easy to stray from God. It's easy to let him become another thing on our to-do list. So what do? How can we be more intentional to bloom where God has us? Think about plants. I think we've established a lot of people have plants in their home. But if you have any near a window in your home, have you ever noticed how they grow and strain and reach for that light? That is the source that will help them grow and bloom. We need to be able to do the same. We need to be growing and straining towards our source, our light, and our relationship with Christ. In Psalm 119 it says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light for my path." If we're not spending time in the word, then we're on a path in the dark. We're also taught in 1 Thessalonians 5, "Be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." We need to be in prayer often to stay tuned into God. But being intentional often requires a change in our mindset and our focus. Several years ago, I had started running. I had a friend talk me into doing a 5K, 3 miles. Never done that before, but it was fine. But then somehow shortly after, I also let that same friend talk me into doing a half marathon, 13 miles. Well, that required a change in my focus. It required a change in my mindset. It meant that I had to start getting up several times a week at 5:30 in the morning to go run. On Saturday mornings, I would get up early to do my long runs and build up my endurance. I would do yoga, I would stretch, everything it took to prepare myself to be able to run this race. It took focus and it took discipline. Last fall, my daughter, Sailor, had started asking for a dog, specifically a dachshund, a wiener dog. Now, it didn't take too long for her to convince me that we did need a dog, but we ended up adopting a rescue, a terrier mix, which I thought was the perfect dog for our family. Meet Harley. However, Sailor remained focused on getting her dream dog. As she would care for Harley each day, she would play with her, she would teach her tricks, she would feed her, water, and then she would say, "Mom, am I doing a good enough job to get a wiener dog?" And I thought, this will pass. A few days, a few weeks, but she continued to be focused with her intention as she would care for Harley day in and day out. and we did end up becoming a 2-dog family, long story short, and she is the happy owner of a dachshund named Dixie. But ask yourself, when is the last time that you had that level of dedication and intention, where you remain that focused day in and day out? If it's hard to recall, maybe you've been living life unintentionally. Life happens, we react to it. But there are areas that we can have under control. In the New Testament, there are numerous passages telling us about living a life with intention. And I'm sure that many of you know these verses. Serve and care for one another. Pray for one another. Be kind and compassionate. Build each other up. We need to think about how the lives of others could be affected if we choose to be more intentional. Now, to bloom where you're planted, we need to be present, be intentional, but finally, we must trust God. Last summer, Bellamy had started running cross country. She's in 1st grade. She was 6 years old at the time. That seems a little crazy, but she was dedicated. Despite many 90-degree days, she loved to get out and run. Most of us don't look like that running in 90-degree weather, but she did. And there were many days she would want me to go and run with her. And on one day in particular, we were running in our neighborhood, and there were some very large hills. And I told her, I'm like, Bellamy, we'd already ran a couple miles. I'm like, I'm going to have to slow down. I feel like I've got to walk. And she turned to me and said, Mom, God gives us strength to do hard things. She was preaching to me as she kept running up the hill, not slowing down. But I was reminded that we are not only teaching ourselves to trust God, but we're teaching our children. We're teaching those around us. In Isaiah 40, it says, He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. How awesome is it that He will be our strength? He will get us up those hills. He will get us through those tough seasons, those hard times, when we trust Him. The Bible tells us a lot about trusting God, but we often make it conditional. If you give me a bigger house, I would practice hospitality. If you give me a new job, I'd have a better attitude about going to work. If you provide me with more money, I'd be able to donate it and really trust you, God. But in Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, it says, Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. We often don't understand His ways and His plans, but He asks us to trust Him. As some of you might know, I grew up on a farm. And there's a passage in James 5 where God talks about the faithful farmer. And as I visited my parents' farm last weekend, we're driving through the country and you see all of the farmers out in the fields. It's the season where the fields are being prepared and they're working up the ground, planting the seed. But then all the work is done and you look out and it's just dirt. And it's then that the farmer is left to just trust God, that He will take that buried seed and produce a crop. Trusting in God is ultimately surrender. It involves acceptance and embracing God's will. It was the beginning of 2011 when my granny had to move into a retirement home. She had lived alone in her house, so it sat empty for 5 months until she had passed away. After that, I went to the house with my dad and realized that all of her plants were still there in the house, being uncared for. You know, they'd sat for so long, and they were looking quite sad. And this is just a picture of a couple of them in the early stages, so parts had died off, fallen off. They were looking kind of sad. I don't have pictures of all of them, but here's a couple. And so I gathered them up, and I took them to my mom, because my mom fixes everything. And she wasn't sure if they would make it, but they all, every single one of them, ended up surviving and flourishing. And I have such a love for these plants. This is what some of them look like today. Because it is a reminder that even after the darkest of seasons, God can bring new life and blooms. So my hope for each of you here today is that you'll choose to intentionally focus on what God has for you in your current season of life, and that you can bloom where you're planted. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you for this gathering of women today. I pray that each of us will seek you and your will in our lives, and that we will choose to trust you, and that you'll supply all that we need. Please transform our hearts to be more like yours, and allow us to grow and be strengthened in you. Help us to model our trust in you to those around us, and choose to be women who live lives with intention. Thank you for the meal that is being prepared, and we ask your blessings on this Mother's Day weekend. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.